Today I'm going to talk about things that are just rolling around in my head, and I got to get them out somehow. And I'm going to talk about evolution and the historical geology and the flood of Noah. So ever since Darwin theorized that we all came from simple life forms, and the idea has taken hold, and I don't buy it. I don't think we came from apes. I don't think that life all evolved from simple life forms. I believe in variation of a kind, within, the dogs that came from, from husbandry, as they say. I mean, that's provable. We can do that. But that we've all came from a simple life form just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm going to dive in and I'm going to start with fossils. If a deer dies in the woods, it doesn't become a fossil, right? It dies, it becomes food. It becomes food for coyotes, for bugs, for vultures, for whatever, It takes special circumstances to create a fossil. And the fact that there are so many fossils across the earth, and it takes sediment, in my mind anyway, it takes sediment to make a fossil, right? Okay, there's other circumstances, there's lava, volcanoes, and tar pits, and quicksand, and whatnot, but the main way that we get fossils is from floods. And so if a deer dies in the woods, it's not becoming a fossil. Simple, common sense thinking. So if the reason I go there is because evolution is based on historical geology, and that just means that the geological evidence that scientists have discovered, indisputable, that there are layers of sediment with fossils trapped in them. So the earliest ones have no life forms. The next layer up has simple life forms, and it gets more complicated as you go up the layers. It's science. Science is science, right? The way they interpret the science, though, the data is accurate, but the conclusions drawn from the data or using the data to fit their theory is wrong. I think it's wrong. And I'm going to try to make you question that a little bit today too. Is it proof? No. Is it an alternate way of thinking? Yes. Okay. So in a flood, so I'm going to go back just a little bit more. So evolution, historical geology, they call it uniformitarianism, which means that the observable weather patterns, erosion patterns, rain patterns, and things that we see in today's world must be the way it's been forever. And so they deduce a long-term pattern to get the results that we see today. Understandable if you discount the biblical record of a great flood. So to me, it's very plausible. So uniformitarianism rejects any idea of a global flood. So the flood of Noah's time that covered the entire earth is just rejected out of hand. Why? Because they don't want to believe the Bible. They don't want to believe in the existence of a God and a record of his interaction with us in the world. I get it. But if the evidence points towards it, then that's not really science if you're ignoring it. So in the flood, obviously there's a lot of sediment. The simple life forms, the trilobites, the roly-polies, the little shells, the little stuff, cannot escape the waters or the sediment. And so obviously the more simple life forms are trapped at the bottom. The more complicated forms escape better and make it higher up into the layers. So a deer can escape the sedimentary waters that's caused by the flood, and I'll go into that in a minute, better than a rabbit can or any simpler life form. That makes sense. So you say, wait a minute, what about the time when there was no life? How did those layers get there? That's not that hard. If you go to the Bible and you read, so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, so let's go back even a little bit farther here. So do you say it's a young earth? I want to say it's a young earth. But in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Does that mean the universe is the same age as the earth? Not necessarily. It just says that he created him. It doesn't say that he created him at the same moment. So the way we interpret the Bible isn't necessarily right either. But I think what's here is accurate. It's just maybe we need to adjust our way of processing the words that are here in front of us. So Genesis 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 2, now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Then there could be the special creation, the 7 days. So the universe could be billions of years old. I don't know. It doesn't necessarily say that it isn't. So the 7 days of creation could be the forming of what happened on the earth. So there's an expanse of time that could exist there. Do I believe the Bible? Yes, I do. Do I believe in 7 days of creation? Yes, I do. Do I believe that everything was created in those 7 days? Not necessarily, just because it doesn't necessarily say it that way. Set that aside. That's fine. That's another debate. So we're talking about the layers without any life form. So God created the earth. It was formless. And it's talking about in Genesis 1:6, it says, let there be an expanse between the waters and separate water from water. So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And so God called the expanse sky. So now we've created the cloud cover and the water covering the earth, the seas. So God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place and let dry ground appear. It's such a simple statement, but what does it take? If water's covering the whole earth, what does it take for land to appear? We're talking about the crust of the earth being disrupted with volcanic and tectonic plate movements to create dry ground, right? Makes sense. Okay, so lava and plate movements creates valleys and mountains so that the water can settle and the dry ground appear. With all that, there's going to be water rushing and layers of sedimentary rock, and you got the layers, Precambrian, that have no life forms. Okay, that can be debated, I understand, but it's there, right? So there's your first layers that have no life forms. Okay, and then we get to the flood. And the flood happens, and you're saying, okay, well, how did all else go about? So we go to Genesis 7, 7:11, second half says, on that day, all of the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heaven were open, and rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, the rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights, but the springs of the great deep burst forth. Again, you're talking about underwater springs, rivers, even volcanic. I mean, the springs of the deep is all that stuff that's under the crust of the earth. So it's creating new sediment layers. So now that the creatures have lived on the earth for a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand years at that point, and they get trapped, and simple life forms can't escape, as well as more complex life forms, and you got all these different layers. It's there, right? Okay, so it didn't take millions of years to get these layers and to get these different forms of life to be trapped in all that. So I don't know. I think that it's a pretty good explanation in my mind. So then you go to places like Kansas, Wisconsin, Montana, and they're finding tropical flora fossilized. How do we get that, right? So the meteorological atmosphere of the earth must have changed, and of course they're attributing that to millions of years. I would offer the concept that before the flood, as God separated the expanse, and the sea was underneath and the clouds above, and what in between was sky, that above, there's some people that believe, and I have to say that it's got some grit to it, is that canopy above was definitely a thicker canopy than we have today. And that, in effect, created a greenhouse effect, making the atmosphere of the earth more tropical and maybe a much more stable than we see today. There wasn't necessarily, any glacier areas and polar caps and hurricane type weathers, because if the earth was more uniform because of this canopy and the tropical atmosphere and a rainforest type flora, then it would be more stable, because what causes wind and hurricane force winds and all that is the different temperatures across the earth, right? When cold fronts hit warm fronts and all that. So they believe that there wasn't any rain necessarily on the earth until after the flood, or till the rain that caused the flood. And that would create that rainforest type flora that is found in areas that today are not hospitable to that type of life form. I don't know. I think it answers the question pretty well. You didn't necessarily need millions of years for these things to change. A couple of thousand years. And it explains a lot of the same questions. It answers a lot of the same questions that are trying to be answered through evolution. And so we talk about the flood, you talk about the animals, you say, wait a minute, you believe in the flood, the actual flood of Noah and the animals and all that? And I say, yes, I do. Why? Because I believe the flood makes sense. And you say, well, what about the animals on the ark? And what about dinosaurs? If the young earth, semi-young earth, and all life forms basically started at the same time, then what about dinosaurs? Did dinosaurs live with man at the same time? I want to say yes. Why? Because there are evidences of human footprints found with dinosaurs. And in this book, it's called The Genesis Flood, and it discusses these things that I'm talking about here. And I haven't really looked online too much, but there are pictures of dinosaurs and human footprints in the same layer, the same, right there with them, so where does the legends of dragons and stuff come from? I don't think it's that far-fetched to think that we actually lived with them, obviously, until the flood. So, okay, how come there aren't dinosaurs now? So in the record of the flood in the Noah's Ark, we have Noah taking the animals on the ark with him. So the flood is recorded by other cultures as well. There's Babylonians have a flood legend, and there are a couple other cultures, and their accounts are a little different, but that's partly because their view of God was different. But the Bible itself says Noah and his sons, together with his wife and the wives of his 3 sons, entered the ark. They had with them every kind of animal according to its kind, every creature that moved along the ground according to its kind, all the livestock according to their kind. Every creature that moves along the ground according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, and everything with wings. Pairs of all creatures that have the breath of life in them came to Noah and entered the ark. Okay, so what's that say? It says of its kind. So that means canines. There only had to be one pair of canines. And from that, microevolution, not macro, micro is the evolution of species, which Darwin observed, and there's no arguing that it happens, right? So you can get a Great Dane and a German Shepherd and a Labrador from one pair of a kind, right? Microevolution would be the mutation from a simple life form to a more complex life form. Mutations are not positive in most cases, right? Mutations are usually a degradation, not an improvement. So horses, you only needed one pair of equestrians, right? And you can get horses and donkeys and mules and zebra and, the great cats of the earth. You got lions and tigers and leopards and even household cats. They're all of a kind. And so dinosaurs, what kind is a dinosaur? It's a reptile, right? We have reptiles. We have alligators and lizards and iguanas and Komodo dragons. The kind still exists. So God didn't need to save the dinosaurs on the ark. He just saved the kind. I don't think that's that hard to accept. And so with that, the earth was populated. The humankind was there, the animal kinds were there, the bird kinds were there. I don't know, accept it or don't. I'm just throwing out a possible alternative to the widely accepted evolution, which has many holes in its theories. They cannot explain what they've been teaching as well as they want you to think. The fossil record is not complete enough to fill in the gaps, because even if it were the way things happened, not everything that dies becomes a fossil. Without the flood, without the sediment, it doesn't happen. So I don't know, just food for thought. Think about it, right? We don't have to accept what's been promoted. Even though there is science involved, the conclusions drawn from the data is not necessarily the truth. So use your brain, question everything, question the Bible, question scientists, question the government, question your parents, but do it respectfully and with an open mind and with the ability to process the data that is given to you. And I don't know, I just, with COVID and trust the science for the vaccine and all the things that are being promoted today, at one time lobotomy was acceptable science. It was a known acceptable cure. You know how many people they destroyed by messing with their brain? It wasn't the right answer. It was just the only answer they had at the time. The science evolves, so to speak. Knowledge and understanding, flat earth. And people say Christians are flat earthers. Whatever. Galileo was actually a Bible-believing, God-fearing man. Einstein himself said that he cannot see this complex earth being created outside of a creator. He wasn't necessarily a Christian, but he believed in a designer. Try and fathom the complexities of the human body and tell me that happened by random chance, I'm going to call BS. So I don't know. Think about it. There's more I was going to say, but I'm going to just leave it there for now and think about it.